Hello, my name is Jude Robinson and I'm here to talk to you about introducing gender and One Health. So what is gender? Gender relates to the physical dimensions of human life and also the social and environmental ways in which people present themselves in the world. And this influences how they experience and interact with other people. And so who you are and what you look like and how other people perceive you affects every aspect of your daily life. But what we would say is that gender identity is not a simple binary between men and women. It's actually more of a spectrum. And so some people might identify as somewhere between men and women. So we would include in this definition trans and non-binary humans. So why do we study gender? Well, it helps us provide a deeper understanding of people's experience and knowledge. If we do research without looking at gender, then that research is very likely to be partial and underinformed. So looking at gender helps us understand how people relate to one another and also to their wider physical and social environment, which is essential for One Health perspectives. And it ensures that research issues are fully researched and understood before conclusions are drawn, so that any resulting implications, policies or practices are properly informed so that they relate to all aspects of that population. So we would argue, without including gender in our research, we cannot fully understand how peoples, households and communities operate. So how can the study of gender contribute to One Health? Well, we know that people's interactions with lots of aspects of their social life are gendered. So who has money, who controls money, who spends money, how much money is gendered between often the men and women in a household. We also know that men and women may experience different access or relationships with livestock. And we also know that they play different roles in their families and in their communities. And we know that their access to resources and their interaction with their environment is also mediated by their gender. And the other reason why gender will contribute to the study of One Health is that it will open up innovative fields of inquiry. So gender-informed research will generate essential knowledge to tackle seemingly intractable issues in animal and human health. And by this original contribution, it means that any research in One Health that looks at gender will have greater reach and relevance. So how can different aspects of gendered life affect research and make us think differently about One Health? Well, let's look at decision making and power. So research has shown us, and we probably know from our daily lives, that often men and women have unequal access to particular resources in their community. And it might be a resource like money, meaning who gets to have money, who gets to keep money, who gets to spend money, who makes the decisions around money. It might be around leisure, so who gets to take time off and who decides how much time they get, or do some people have to work harder or longer hours than other people. Time is also important, so being able to manage your own time and make timing decisions can be very important, and we know that affects long-term physical and mental health. Access to public space. Some women do not have the same access as men to public space. They're expected to stay within the household. Equally, some men may be forced to spend a lot of their time outside the household, and have more restricted access to private space. Food is another key issue that men and women may find themselves having different access to or different abilities to make decisions about, and transport, which again is fundamental often to people being able to access increased resources like education or employment. We know that in some families or households and communities, women may be excluded from family and community decision making, or they may play a more minor role. Some may not be able to express their opinions freely, particularly if men or older women are present. And this has very important implications for research design and research carried out in One Health. If women cannot be reached and their decisions can't be ascertained, it is not acceptable simply to get male family members or older female members to express their views for them. So research needs to be designed sensitively and properly resourced to enable all voices to be heard. We know that women have unequal access to education across the globe. They are more likely to be required to marry early and therefore be unable to move away, work, continue education, and some women cannot divorce without the permission of male family members. And this severely restricts women's decision-making power. So if they are required to marry early, they may also therefore have children early. And again, that might not be their decision when they start a family. So what we know is that health and socioeconomic inequalities persist within households. So we can't just look at household income and make decisions about the relative wealth or the relative success or health of those family members. If resources are not distributed equally within households, then some family members may be suffering poverty while other family members may experience relative affluence. And we know worldwide, despite the fact that many women live within households, they do experience greater poverty than men, and this clearly has an impact on their health. Another danger is that women's labour may also be invisible. So the work that women contribute to a household is often unpaid and may go unrecognised. And then their views may also be made invisible or misrepresented by household members. And the difficulty of this is if they're working primarily within the household, who gets to see this? And their work is often unrecognised or unpaid, and they're not often asked to contribute directly to research. And we have often accepted in research situations that other people are able to answer for them. Another area of interest to people who look at gender is gender and the body, and this has clear implications for health and medicine. So we know that bodies are gendered, and people make assumptions about roles, beliefs, behaviours based on the way men and women dress or present their hair, it might be their voice, and also we can look at body language, so deportment, the way in which men and women conduct themselves in public and in private. So women and men engage in different bodily activities to signal often their gender or their age or their status to other people. We know that men and women experience different patterns of aging, and this is mediated by social systems and culture. So it can be very advantageous for a man to acquire age because they get greater status within a community. However, often women, as they age, become more and more marginalised in some cultures and less listened to. And their health becomes very precarious as they may be allocated fewer and fewer resources in terms of clothes or food or even just participation in social life as they age. Men also experience difficulties though because they're regarded as strong. They may feel pressured to undertake quite risky behaviours, so dangerous work, arduous work, endurance work, so working in mines or spending hours out of doors or doing other dangerous activities. Men are often called on to fight in times of conflict and may suffer bodily injury as a result. They also often engage in smoking or drinking and other associated risky behaviours to prove their masculinity to others in their community. And this is part of them fulfilling wider cultural expectations. And this is pressure that is often put on men and they may find it difficult to deal with. Women, of course, experience menstruation, pregnancy and childbirth and associated hormonal changes. And this often means that they may suffer trauma, bodily trauma at different times in their lives. And this will have an impact on their long-term health. Now, looking in terms of gender health and medicines, what research has consistently shown is that women and men have unequal access to healthcare. So women are less likely to seek help and treatment when they're ill. And it also means that even when they access that healthcare, they may actually have a very different service compared to men. Men and women also have unequal access to medication. It could be that particular resource allocation means that the men are more likely to get medication when they need it, or the right prescription, the right grade of medication. And it could be that women also are unable to travel to access particular medication. We also know that women and men have different bodies, and some conditions may present very differently. So they may react differently to medication and treatment, which is often underexplored. So because women present with heart disease very differently than men, there's good research to show that many cardiac events in women go undiagnosed because they don't present in the same way as men do. And we know that women may need to request permission and household resource before they even seek treatment. And we also know that some requests may be denied, and this is going to have a major impact on women's health and life expectancy. Men also suffer pressures though. Research has consistently shown across the world that men may be reluctant to seek help and treatment, as their families may suffer if they take time away from work, but they also may be concerned with social norms, that others may see them as weak if they admit to having an illness or not being able to cope with an injury. And so men often delay seeking help, and timely treatment might have made all the difference to their long-term health and well-being. So how do resource allocation and health, how are these mediated by gender? Well, what we know is that men are more likely to own land, property and livestock than women. And this will affect everything in terms of a woman's life, in terms of how much money she can control and how much resource she then has access to. And so it's not really surprising that women and men have different access to food and nutrition. And this is often mediated by cultural beliefs about which foods are appropriate for men and which foods are appropriate for women. And in times of scarcity and hardship, it can mean that they're differently impacted by environmental issues such as drought or flood. And if women own livestock, they may not have always the resources to feed and treat their animals adequately, based on their perceived value in the household economy. So if women's animals are seen as perhaps lesser to the livestock owned by men, then they are not going to survive or thrive in the same way. The other thing is that even when women have access to livestock and may be selling products at market, they may not always be able to control the profits they make from agriculture. And even if they can control small amounts of money, women across the world generally have less say about what we call high value decisions around expenditure. So high value decisions are about a house, where we're going to live, about investment in new equipment or new livestock. So the things that really cost a lot, we tend to see men making those decisions, and women's opinions maybe be given, but given little value. We also know that men may strongly identify with their livestock, and if they do lose their land and animals through financial or environmental misfortune, we know that they may suffer from poor mental health and anxiety, and this again will have very adverse consequences for their health. So in terms of gender, education and employment, so we know that girls and boys have different access to educational opportunities, and so understandably this also means they have different access to employment opportunities too. So girls in low-income areas often leave school at an earlier age, and we've talked about how often women are pressured to marry at an early age and have children, start families and contribute to the household. And they might well be required to work close to home. So even if they do complete their education after high school and even have further education, what we know is that they're not necessarily free to leave to pursue employment opportunities, but they're expected to live at home and travel relatively short distances. And because girls' labour is so often required at home, we know that their schooling may be repeatedly disrupted by caring duties and very early marriage we've talked about, but also menstruation. So some women who cannot obtain the resources they need to appear in public when they're menstruating may have to stay at home. And this is also mediated by cultural beliefs about blood and bleeding, which might mean that women are actually asked to stay at home by the family members. But we also know that boys have problems too. So as they're expected to contribute to the harvest and livestock care, and will be expected to maybe take even a role in the household if other male family members are away, they often also have to take time out of school, and this disrupts their education and their future opportunities too. But what we know, and this is from the World Health Organization, that households and communities that invest in the education of girls beyond compulsory education tend to be more prosperous in the longer term. So that's not just the girls that are more prosperous, it is the households and communities, so the men as well, who are more prosperous in the longer term. And this is compared to where girls have limited or no education. So what we know is that men do have greater opportunities for further and higher education and paid work outside the home, and they also have opportunities to travel to find better opportunities, and this increases their life chances overall. Having said that, while men may travel for work, this may disconnect them from families and communities and other religious support, and they may become isolated and suffer from mental health issues. So it is very important to look at the kinds of opportunities that men travel towards. So if it's low paid, not particularly great living conditions, work, say working in mines or working as a labourer, that's not actually very good in terms of men's mental and physical health in the long term. So in terms of studies of gender and health, just to give you an idea of what they may have contributed to One Health, I'm just going to go through two studies that I've found in the research literature. So the first study is looking at family planning and the Samburu in Kenya, and it uses qualitative methods to explore the thoughts of men on population health and environment programs, so a family planning program in rural Kenya. The reason that they wanted to look at this was that we know that family size affects resource use, food security and reproductive health of women. But often men are opposed to employing family planning and prefer to have larger families. This is traditional, and it's also believed to help in times of crisis. But when this study it used focus groups and interviews with 27 men, actually sat down with the men and looked at their views and discussed family planning, what they took was a more environmental approach and talked to the men about the challenges they faced when there was famine or drought, and how having a large family actually really put pressure on the resources. It led to resource exhaustion, it led to environmental degradation, and it also led to wildlife dispersal, which also was not great for the Samburu in terms of their wider commitments in the region. And so what they concluded was that by engaging men in these discussions about resource, livestock, environment, the idea of family planning suddenly made much more sense. And they were able to also alleviate any concerns the men had about future fertility of the women or their own future fertility as well. So that using family planning did not mean they couldn't have children in the future either. So it seemed to be, they concluded, the authors, that by looking at gender, by looking at men's beliefs and men's practices, and also looking at the environment, they were better able to consult and discuss family planning issues. The other study is by Hadley and colleagues in Ethiopia, and it looks at food insecurity. And it identifies food insecurity as a major problem because we know that it affects mental health and physical health, it can affect academic performance and work performance as well. So it's absolutely fundamental that people in their early years in particular have adequate nutrition. But they wanted to look particularly at food insecurity within households. So not just look at how food insecure a household were, but how a food insecure household allocates resources of food within the household. And they particularly wanted to look at the food supply for adolescents. And they introduced the concept of buffering, or rather who gets to be buffered. So buffering is a concept that means that when families have very limited resources, they make decisions about who gets more, and of course if someone else gets more, then someone else gets less. So this was very much about who gets more and who gets less in terms of resources. So they looked at population data in over 2,000 households, looking at the food security or insecurity of adolescents. And they found that while boys and girls were equally likely to live within food insecure housing, girls were far more likely to report food insecurity than boys. And the more insecure the home, the greater that food insecurity. And the authors concluded that this was a real issue, a real public health issue, because what we know is that if girls don't get enough to eat during adolescence, this affects not only their own future health, but also the future health of any children that they might have. So in late adolescence, girls do have an opportunity to catch up in terms of their nutrition. So if they get more food, even if they've had a relatively food deprived childhood, if they get some food during adolescence, they can actually catch up in terms of their growth. And so any growth stunting can be alleviated by this nutrition. We also know that girls who don't get enough to eat in their adolescence are far more likely to give weight to low birth weight babies. And we know that low birth weight in babies is a poor indicator of their future health as well. So the authors concluded that really food insecurity needed to be looked at not just at household level, but within households, and that adolescents should be identified as an absolute target for any interventions around buffering strategies within families. So just to conclude now, studying gender as part of One Health is essential for these thorough understandings of issues of health inequalities within communities and within households. And so we would argue that research that ignores gender's dimensions of social and economic life is likely to be partial and incomplete. We know that gender can help explain persistent health and social inequalities, and that understanding gender can ensure that the health of all is improved by any interventions.